Welcome everyone to a very special event. In a few minutes, I'm going to be introducing a friend who was largely responsible for my early success. This, of course, is Mike Brooks, Mr. Inside Sales speaking. And the friend I'm speaking about, of course, is Stan Billue. And years ago, when I was a financial broker, and then later as a coach and mentor, when I really started my career as a speaker and trainer, Stan was the one who helped me along. In fact, I credit Stan for getting me on the path to success in the late 80s when I turned a small investment in his training material into over $7 million of income. And then when I started my journey into the training arena, I called on him many times for advice, counsel, and coaching, and Stan was always there for me, as he's been around for hundreds of thousands of other people around the world for the last 32 years. Now, as I mentioned, today's webinar is very special for all of us, since this is the very last time in history that Stan is being recorded. Now, as always with this man, I promise you an entertaining journey, plus you'll hear some great skills and techniques which you can immediately go on and use to increase your production and income in inside sales. Now, you'll probably want to listen to many, many times in the future this recording, and I've invited Stan to talk about his newest training program called 30 Days to Greatness in Sales. So I prepared a list of questions to help anyone listening to make a decision as to whether to add this invaluable training series to your learning library. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, I'd like to introduce my mentor and my very dear friend, Mr. Fantastic Stan Billue. Stan, welcome.
Mike, thank you very much, and I'll add my welcome to the thousands of people from around the world who will be listening to this recorded replay for months and even years down the road.
Stan, you had a very disturbing diagnosis back in February. Do you feel comfortable at all discussing that briefly?
Mike, I'd be happy to. You know, there's an old saying that we should live every day as if it were our last, because one day it will be. Well, that really hit home for me on February the 6th, when I was diagnosed with advanced cancer of the liver and the pancreas and given 3 to 6 months to live. Now, that hit me like a ton of bricks for all of about 20 minutes. And then I immediately started to think, how could I turn this negative into a positive and this challenge into opportunities? And of course, as soon as you heard the news, you were one of the very first people to call me with your support, your love, your prayers, which I deeply appreciate. And when you asked me what plans I was making, I told you that I would be spending more quality time with my family and friends. Plus, I was looking for ways to touch as many people in a positive way over the next 3 months as I had in the last 3 years. Now, that's when you asked me to do this one last recorded webinar, which will be posted all over the internet, again, for many, many years to come.
Yeah, Stan, thank you for allowing us to do this interview and this recording, and I'm really happy to spend some time with you. I'd like to talk just briefly about a project that you've invested probably the last 12 months or more in. I know it's very important to you, and I think it's very important to everyone who can hear about it today. It's your new sales training course called 30 Days to Greatness.
I know salesmen are known for talking, but sometimes as important, if not more important than talking, is listening. And it is a skill, because most people don't realize to really listen intently is critical. Listen to what the other person is saying, because most salespeople are only thinking of what they're going to say next after the other person is done talking, rather than intently listen to what they're saying. So it's definitely a skill that we need to develop. And there's actually 3 things that we need to listen for. Number 1, what they are saying. Of course, this refers to the actual words that they're using, which may or may not be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. number two, how they are saying it, and this refers to the sincerity and emotion or lack thereof of their delivery. And number three, what they really mean. And lastly, the most important part of listening is to determine the meaning of those words, since many prospects and customers will often tell us what they think we want to hear. So it's important to have them explain what they say if we aren't sure. You could ask questions like, can you explain that further? Or what does that really mean? Or what are you basing that on? Or use my favorite of all time, which is 3 magic words, tell me more. And whatever they say next to explain, justify, or enhance their original statement is normally a lot closer to the truth. Now, next is an advanced skill, which is actually fairly easy to use and master if we try, and believe me, this will pay you enormous dividends. We should listen for and use the other person's favorite words and phrases. Now, Mike, the average person will use 1 or 2 of their favorite words or phrases every minute they're talking. These will be words and phrases which we recognize. However, they aren't necessarily part of our everyday vocabulary. However, because the other person uses them, we should listen carefully, jot them down, and then use them back in our conversation. We can use them next week, tomorrow, or as soon as the next sentence. And believe me, Mike, 95% of the prospects or customers that you use this technique with will have no idea what we're doing. All they will know is that they're becoming extremely comfortable speaking with us because we are talking their language. All they know is that, they're starting to feel comfortable. They don't know why. It works like a charm.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Stan. And, I learned to listen, and I teach currently that the best way to learn to listen is to use your mute button. And
Great.
Yep, because many times even I can't help myself from talking, but if I'm on mute, then I can talk over the prospect, but they don't hear me. They just hear me listening, and then that teaches me to listen as well. Now, another thing I know that you are as big on the critical need for scripting as I am. I'm all about scripting. So how about some tips on some qualifying scripts, or whether a call or even in-person meeting, how important is qualifying?
Well, it's critical, Mike. Particularly, as an example, would be qualifying. Whether you're on a call or in person, person-to-person meeting, it's absolutely critical that you use a script during qualifying.
Yeah.
Now, as an example, that's the main area that it's critical to use, because we oftentimes rely on our memory to gather all the information we might need. And oftentimes we, in the heat of battle, if you will, we overlook something important and we don't realize it until we're off the call. So if you're absolutely dead set against having and using a script, at least have a checklist on the key points of information that you need to gather, so you can kind of check them off as you cover each one of them. And I hope you understand that the old saying that they don't care how much we know until they know how much we care. So please appreciate that prospects have 3 things they care about most, which are themselves, their job or career, and their family. So it's critical that we get them to open up and talk about themselves in order to build rapport. Now, please note that I didn't say, we talk about it. Let them talk about themselves. I didn't say have a conversation. I can't stress enough that you must become a great listener and not a conversationalist. The average person would rather talk about him or herself than hear about the 10 most famous people who ever lived. And the odds are that you're not one of the 10 most famous people that ever lived. So I'm sorry to bust your bubble. However, they don't care about you. And the longer you can put the spotlight on them and make them feel important, the more they will like you, and people do business with people they like. Now, depending on your product or service, there are many different things you might need to learn about. And although you may only be required to find out 3 or 4 key points for compliance purposes or technically to complete a sale, I encourage you to go through this list and see how many of them could be relevant to your product or service that you're selling. And by the way, the best definition I've ever heard of qualifying, Mike, is gather the information that we'll need to make a sale. So if you both have the time and they're not rushed, I suggest you try and find out as much as you can. Here's a possible list that you can choose from. Why they have an interest in your product or service, or why they don't have interest in your product or service. What they're using now, if anything, and what they like about what they're using, what they have. And if they're using something, what don't they like about what they have? Why they would consider changing. Why they wouldn't want to change. What is their budget? What is their liquidity? Who makes the decisions? How those decisions are actually made? How long does it take to make decisions? Their age or experience, their income or net worth, possibly some family information, possibly their occupation or career information, their short and long-term goals relating to your product or service, and their dream or hot button. So since you may be gathering info on, let's say 6 to 10 bits and pieces of information, I encourage you not to make it sound like an FBI interrogation. And here's what I mean. In Selling 101, we learned that there are open-ended and closed-end questions. However, I suggest you quit using either one of them, because questions have a tendency to prod, probe, and pry, and they can be somewhat confrontational. Instead, start using instructional statements, which sound much more conversational in nature. You can use, tell me about, as a lead-in, or fill me in a little on, or bring me up to date on, or share with me why, and then you add whatever it is you want to learn. And again, this will help you separate the liars from the buyers. In other words, many prospects have scripted answers to your scripted questions. The odds are you're not the only salesperson that's ever called on them or met with them about your type of product or service. So over the years, they found out that all the salesmen that sell this have the same basic questions. So over time, they've developed scripted answers for your scripted questions. So again, they're telling us what they think we want to hear and not necessarily the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Consequently, whenever they answer a question or respond to one of these instructional statements, you should always, always, always use a continuation phrase. So rather than jump into your next question or your next instructional statement on your list, the minute they're done talking, you would say, please continue, or go on, or and then what happened? And again, my all-time favorite, tell me more. And whatever they say next, Mike, is usually the truth because you got them off of their prepared script. Top pros actually...
Can I interject for just
Sure.
a moment, Stan? Yeah, I
Sure.
want to just give you a break here from talking. I'm maybe get a little sip of water for you, but I just want to chime in here because what you're giving the audience right now is gold. What you're saying right now is what I spend my career trying to teach sales reps, and that is to, and here's my favorite word these days, engage the prospect and the buyer. In other words, give them an opportunity to engage with you, to speak to you, and to reveal to you what their buying motives may be and or what their possible objections are. And I'll tell you now, what I spent a lot of time speaking with, and I'd love to get your feedback on this, you know, it's really big around the sales world to qualify prospects. But what I like to do instead, and you talk about getting them off their script, and I think prospects and customers have scripts just like reps do, but what you taught me a long time ago to do, and what I concentrate on doing, is not qualifying. Instead, I look for ways to disqualify prospects. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Mike, that's probably one of the biggest single reasons why you became the superstar that you were in selling and the superstar you are as a sales trainer, as a script writer. You have by far been the best student, if you will, I've ever had the pleasure of working with, because you picked up on this one tip, and that is that top pros actually look for reasons to disqualify prospects to avoid wasting the time of chasing them or talking to people who have moved into a cave or joined the witness protection program because they won't or can't buy or make a decision. So here's a couple more skills for you top pros making 6 or 7 figures, or, you know, if you want to be a top pro making 6 or 7 figures, especially if you're selling, let's say, an investment or any other high-ticket item. You always bump for big bucks. And here's what I mean. If you ask them what they could start with, or how much they have liquid, or however you approach it, whatever they say, before you go on, you would simply use the disappointed technique, which can be just one word, and it's spelled O-O-O-O-O. I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 O's and an H. And it's pronounced ooh. That's it. Ooh. So, you know, what type of dollar figure did you have liquid, or were you consider starting with, or whatever? Oh, about 50,000. Ooh. A majority of the time, they will now come back with something like, oh, why do I need more? And this gives you the right to talk about a larger amount. That one simple word, ooh, or oh, can increase your average sale by at least 20%. So you said, Mike, some of these are absolute jewels. You know, some of the techniques that you and I teach are good for maybe 1% improvement over the overall 100% ways we can improve. There's others that, oh my gosh, they jump out at you like a sore thumb, and this is one. That one technique, that one word, if you will, can increase your average sale by 20% across the board. And again, I'm not going to waste time, insult your intelligence by telling you to do the math, but whatever your production was last year, you know, change one word, add one word, if you will, ooh, and, you know, add 20% to it. Add 20% to your income. One word can make that big a difference. Now, the next one I learned from a superstar making over $1 million a year, when he asked for the amount of money, they would give him an answer, and he would immediately say, up to. So as an example, you know, what type of liquid and available dollars would you consider setting aside as far as your initial position? And they say 50,000, up to. That quick, respond with up to. Now normally, a high percentage of the time, they will give you a higher figure. And he says, well, I don't know, maybe 70, 75, and no more than. And no more than. Now, not necessarily a majority of the time, your percentages start to fall a little bit, but at least 30 to 40% of the time, they will now give you even a higher figure. Well, I might be able to stretch 80, 80 maybe tops, okay? Now, as powerful as this technique was for him, I added one more choice of words, which was, and if you really got excited about it, what's the max you would consider? That's 4 bumps, Mike, 4 bumps. You know, up to, and no more than. And if you really got excited, what's the max you could do? And the odds are that you just bumped that prospect or client by 20 to 50%. So there you go. Take those two techniques alone, and you've just increased your production, your effectiveness, your income by at least 40 and possibly as much as 70%. Hello, did a light bulb just go off for somebody somewhere? If you only learn to bump every time money is mentioned, you will become successful and wealthy beyond your wildest dreams.
Yeah. And, you know, I personally know that these techniques work. And you know what? This is really a variation on everyone. This is a variation on the technique that you've probably all been taught, which is something called the upsell. And it's a real compact version of the upsell, because rather than explain or go into another product or talk about something that's that they could also purchase, what you're doing is you're staying with the original sale and you're actually upselling the original sale. Stan is calling it a bump, but you know, it's these little techniques that if you just use them, and I think Stan said on every single prospect, if you do that, you will be amazed at how much more successful you're going to be. And since you're in the closing arena anyway, isn't it worth trying an extra word, ooh, or up to? And remember what Stan said, you have to immediately follow whatever the amount is. How many people would you be thinking of putting into training? Oh, about 10, up to. Oh, well, I've got 15 other customer service reps. You think they'd be appropriate for this? You bet they would. And who else could you think of? How about your other offices? Just those little techniques. Bump up the sale, bump up your income, and like Stan said, most people, I'd say 90% of salespeople, wouldn't even think of doing this, and even if they did, they wouldn't attempt to do it. Stan, I'm getting a ton of information here. I'm taking a lot of notes. I'm glad I've got these slides. How about some techniques for the actual presentation itself?
Well, great suggestion. It'd be my pleasure. Let me start with one of the two most critical important points I ever learned and worked on to master as a sales pro. The first is to establish criteria for a sale. Establish criteria for a sale. And you'd be amazed, over 90% of salespeople or imposters calling themselves salespeople miss this or aren't even aware of it. Now, the reason this is so critical is that many salespeople seem to go into their presentation as if their goal is to inform and or educate and or ask questions about their product or service. Well, your real purpose should be to make an intelligent presentation so the prospect can make an informed decision and then help them make the right decision. So here you're letting the prospect know in advance, and possibly what's even more important is to remind yourself that you're going to ask for a decision and that you expect a decision at the end of your presentation. So you might say, you know, part of my responsibility is to make sure I answer all of your questions so you can make an informed decision. At the end of our call, if everything makes sense, I'll expect you to get started, and if it doesn't, you certainly have my permission to say no. Is that fair enough? Or you might say, during this call, I'm going to share all of the facts and figures with you that you'll need to make an informed decision. At the end, I expect you to tell me how I did by either taking advantage of our offer or passing on it. Does that make sense? Another great tip is to always rate their interest after each feature and benefit. And normally I didn't say just feature or just benefit. They go hand in hand. Always rate their interest. So after you stress a feature and benefit about your product or service, you should always then ask, is that important to you? And then rate it, at least in your mind, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being little or no interest and 10 being they're so excited they're ready to go get their checkbook. So is one choice would be, is that important to you? Or you might say, would that save you money? Or can you see the value of that? Now pay close attention on which benefits score the highest and the best responses. Then when it comes time to start handling objections and closing, you'll know which benefits to go back to so you can expand or enhance them and build even more value on the 2 or 3 points that they express the most interest in.
Wow. Stan, you mentioned earlier that establishing criteria for a sale was one of 2 critical points that you ever learned about making effective presentations. What's the second?
You were listening. just as establishing criteria for a sale needs to be at or near the beginning of our presentations, a benefit summary can be critical to use in wrapping up our presentation. To fully appreciate its value, let's say our normal presentation runs, let's say, even 5 or 10 minutes. Well, then we've answered a couple of questions and possibly handled 2 or 3 objections or concerns. And if you add all of this together, it means that we've been overwhelming them, if you will, with information for like 20 to 30 minutes. And honestly, their head could be swimming from information overload. Then we start asking them to make a decision and wonder why they invariably say that they need to think it over or do some more studying about it or talk to somebody else about it. What they're trying to tell us is that we've given them so much information that they're having a difficult time at digesting it all at one time and then making a decision. We can dramatically increase our closing ratio by using a benefit summary to make it as easy as possible for them to make a positive decision. Now, here's an example of a benefit summary from an oil and gas investment. You might say, Mike, in wrapping up, here are the 5 factors that you need to base your decision on today. Number 1, we're drilling in a prolific field where over 300 wells have already been drilled with 0 dry holes. Number 2, this is an 8-well project where 5 of the wells have already been drilled, so all we need to do is simply complete them and put them into production. Number 3, several of the wells have multiple pay zones, or seams as they call it. This will allow us to commingle the production from several zones simultaneously in order to maximize your return on investment. Number 4, Uncle Sam allows you to deduct every single dollar you invest in domestic oil and gas exploration off of your income, which can dramatically reduce the income taxes that you needlessly pay. Plus, 15% of the income from your wells is also tax-free. And number 5, our most conservative production estimates indicate that you could receive all of the money you've invested back in your pocket within the first 2 years or so, which means you would then own part of up to 8 producing wells, absolutely free and clear, that can throw off income to you and your family for up to the next 10 to 20 years or even longer. At 36.8 per unit, how big of a piece of the pie can you handle? Now, you see where we've made it simple for the prospect or client to decide by refreshing their mind on the 5 main benefits. Now, let's say when I covered those during the presentation, they only really had an interest in 4 of them. So again, I would back up and simply tweak it a little bit and say, Mike, in wrapping up, here are the 4 factors that you need to base your decision. And that's what we call tailor-making a presentation to the prospect or the client. And folks, if you're not doing a benefit summary, you're leaving at least 20% of your potential business on the table.
Stan, this is phenomenal information. I must say that every time we speak, every time I listen to you, you remind me of the things that I may not be doing now, but that I know from doing previously are going to instantly increase my income now, even as a consultant as well. And I just want to say one last thing before we move on is I love how you set the close up in the very beginning. I teach this as well. You need to let people know what you're going to tell them. Make sure you have the criteria for the sale, many times including who the decision makers are, what that decision tree is like, timeline, and that sort of thing. And then we call it a trial close, and you can soften it by telling them that you're going to ask for a decision at the end and getting their buy-in. And then if you use that technique, as you've already stated, in conjunction with the benefit statement and then ask for the sale, you will increase your closing percentage by 20% at least. So I'm loving all of this, Stan. I hope the audience is as well. How about some tips on handling objections?
I'll be happy to, Mike. Let me just back up a second, because that was very astute of something you just said, is that many times when you and I talk, you're reminded about something. And folks, listen, if you're a top pro already, if you're already at or near the production in your company or even your industry, you'll find that pros, we don't need to be taught as often as we need to be reminded. When I do consulting work with the companies, invariably I hear them say something like, you know, that is such a powerful idea. Man, we used to do that and it worked like, oh man, it was great. When we used it, why did we get away from it? And it just reminds you of, you know, some of the skills and techniques that helped us become who we are, but whatever reason, we got lazy, sloppy, and we got away from it. Okay, now you asked me a little bit about objections. One of my favorite subjects, I could do 4 hours just on this alone. A great tool to have in our objection handling arsenal, if you will, is the single biggest reason question. The single biggest reason question. Now, we can use this if we aren't sure why they're considering buying by asking, I'm curious, what's the single biggest reason keeping you from getting started? So it many times will smoke out the real or hidden objection. Or you can say, you can actually reverse this by saying, as an example, if you did invest in this, what would be the single biggest reason for moving ahead? So even if they said they're really not interested, I understand. Let me ask you, if you did invest in this, what would be the single biggest reason for moving forward? Now what you're trying to do is smoke out a hidden buying motive or hot button that maybe they were hiding on purpose. They didn't want you to know it, and you just smoked it out by kind of sneaking up on them with that one, if you will. The odds are that you've just discovered, or at least verified, their real objection and or their actual buying motive.
Wow, it's so true. And, you know, I hope that everybody who is listening right now to Stan's webinar, what Stan is giving you is the result of over 30 years of being a top producer, being a top sales trainer, being a top consultant and coach. And the reason he is the top at what he is doing is because he uses these techniques that work. And I'm here to tell you, as Mr. Inside Sales, these techniques do work. They'll work in today's sales environment. They'll work whether you're in inside sales or if you're in outside sales. Stan, so often I get the question, well, gee, your material for inside sales is great, but I'm an outside sales rep. Yeah, well, guess what? The same word is in that sentence, which is sales. You do want to close more business, don't you? Of course you do. So
hallelujah.
Hallelujah is right. You're going to learn from these techniques. And Stan, you know, I don't want to tax your energy. I've almost had you speaking for a whole hour, and I know that it's probably more than you've spoken in a while. So I want to wrap up the session, but I do want to get just a little bit more information. You mentioned that your program, 30 Days to Sales Greatness in Sales, and I just want to give that a plug again because this will be the best $197 or even $167 investment you'll ever make in yourself if you're a professional salesperson out there. But you said that it includes a tip that all sales pros can use to become a superstar, and that 98% of all salespeople don't even have a clue for what that is. Do you mind sharing that for free?
Be happy to, Mike. And you mentioned over 30 years. Well, if I make it to July, I will celebrate my 38th anniversary, 38 years of investing at least 1 hour a day to get just a little better today than I was yesterday, or be a little bit better tomorrow than I was today. That's what you call a commitment to be the best at what you do. I still have more to learn, but an hour a day for almost 38 years. All right, the most important skill, tip, technique, whatever you want to call it, idea, light bulb that I can ever give a salesperson is this: simply record and critique at least one call or presentation a day for the rest of our career. Every single sales pro that has ever tried this will testify that they hear things on the recording that they don't remember from the live call or the live presentation. What we can improve will jump out at us like a sore thumb. Possibly we weren't as enthusiastic as we should have been in the right places. Maybe we didn't pace ourselves to our prospect's style or their speed of speaking. Maybe we stepped on their answers. Possibly our answers were to their questions and or objections were way too wordy. We hear that maybe that we never really tailor-made any part of our presentation to their needs or their goals or hot buttons or their wants or desires. Or worse yet, we never found out those critical factors during our qualifying. The list goes on and on. However, hopefully our listeners will get the point. The greatest single way to become a sales superstar is to hear firsthand what we sound like and how we can improve. We can become our own best sales trainer, our own best sales manager, our own best motivator. And of course, if we actually start recording and critiquing ourselves, we've just accepted responsibility for our success or the lack of it. We lose our ability to blame anyone or anything else for our lack of success.
Yeah, and that single technique, Stan, and I say this when I do my trainings to companies, and I always give you credit, Stan. I say that you said there was one thing you could do to double your income in 90 days, and I didn't believe it was true at the time. I thought it was just hype. I thought you were just trying to sell your cassettes at the time, but you know what? I was willing to do whatever I needed to do to be a top sales pro. So I took you up on that challenge, and by golly, in 90 days, Stan, not only did I double my income, which floored everyone at the company I was working at, but I continued to use and study and learn and practice all of your techniques. And Stan, 9 months later, I was the #1 sales rep out of 5 branch offices. And it's because of the material, the training, the tools, the skills that you teach that I diligently learned and applied. That was the reason. So I'll tell you now, I want to thank you, Stan, from me to you right now, right here, for everything that you've taught me, all the time and energy and love that you put into all of this, all of your products, and they work. They made a huge difference in my life and my family's life, and for hundreds of thousands of salespeople around the world